This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. One of the questions I get asked quite a lot, obviously on the channel, you know that I use, why haven't I got the microphone on? Most of us are au fait with the idea, that's French for with milk, that with different guitars, or the same preset will sound different with different guitars. I think this is one of the things that if you go on like the Helix Facebook group, some of the folks there say that you should be cautious or wary or knowledgeable of this sort of stuff when you're going to buy presets, because whatever the demo video was like doesn't necessarily mean that you will get that same result when you buy the preset, and they have a valid point. So I've done a video on this in the past as well about whether you should buy presets or not. Obviously I have a slightly vested interest in this, given that you can buy my presets if you wish to, but I try to price them in a way where they're kind of about the price of a coffee anyway for all of them. And also I do show you how I build them, so hopefully there's enough goodwill there that you don't think that I'm totally ripping you off. But yeah, so certainly I think we're probably all familiar with the idea, I think probably, that if you were to grab my presets and play through them, that potentially they wouldn't sound exactly the same as in my videos unless you play with my hands, not in a weird way. But the other thing is that playing different guitars through the same preset yields different results. I wanted to just talk about that a little bit, because people ask me, you know, how would you set up this preset for a guitar with humbuckers? Or, you know, they might say, I play with a PRS. How can I make it sound like a Les Paul? I did get that one earlier in the week. These sorts of questions. Or have you ever set up a preset for P90s or Filtertron pickups? So
My personal philosophy on this stuff is generally something along the lines of this, and it's probably the laziest approach that there could be, but I think it's a rational approach as well. So if I'm picking up a guitar, I'm picking it up specifically because either I want to play that thing today because of the way it looks, or the way it sounds, or the way that it feels to play. Now my approach is that guitar comes with its own characteristics, and therefore generally my presets I keep pretty much the same no matter what guitar I'm playing. Now I might gravitate towards certain presets more often than not, and I might gravitate towards certain presets with certain guitars. So for instance, the main lead tone you hear me play with most of the time, I would play that with pretty much any of my guitars. So whether they're humbuckers, whether they're single coils, whether they're P90s, and I think this is probably my most consistent sort of sound, tone, whatever you want to call it. And I think probably you might find that if you played with that preset, you might sound pretty much like that. The reason that that preset is characteristic in that way is because it has a lot of gain, it has a compressor up the front boosting things, and quite a strong sort of mid focus. There's not tons of highs, there's not tons of lows. It's quite a mid-heavy voice. So for that reason, I think whenever I play any of my guitars through it, you get subtleties. So like the Les Paul sounds a bit thicker, I think. The Strats would necessarily sound a little bit more snappy if I was playing through a Strat with them or a Telecaster. But the general voice of the thing will remain very similar. The other thing is that I play presumably a Les Paul slightly differently to what I might play a Tele or Strat. So you get like the physical thing going on when you pick up a different guitar. Does that make sense or not? Let me know in the comments if that's total horse manure. The other thing though, so say you had a preset where you wanted something to be definitely clean, this is where you need to be quite careful, I think, with your selection of guitar, and maybe you would have to set up different presets. So The Edge of Breakup is a film starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, and no, this is a different place for different types of pickups. So for instance, a hot Les Paul pickup is obviously going to drive the front of this, your modeler, harder than a Strat pickup. So what has happened to me in the past potentially is if you've got something which is sort of in that sweet spot for a Strat, when you go to play a Les Paul through it, it is already kind of driving and singing a little bit. I've got a good example of this actually that I'll just drop in here, because I started off with a single coil on a Tele, moved to P90s with a Revstar, and then moved to PAFs with the Les Paul. And I think you can hear some interesting differences there. Again, in that introduction, what I'd probably be selecting, rather than going down and making specific preset changes, if I'm not looking for that tone, then I probably wouldn't pick up that guitar, right? If I'm looking for something to be super clean, I'd probably either just change the preset, or change the guitar, or roll the volume back on the Les Paul, something like that. I'm generally not going in and making tweaks on a per preset basis if I pick up a different guitar. And I think that probably mirrors the real world fairly closely. So, for instance, if you look at John Mayer gigs or Robin Ford gigs or, I don't know, Eric Johnson gigs, I don't think that they make specific tweaks if they pick up a different guitar. The pedal board generally stays the same. Now, I'm not totally sure. I can't remember if there might be a Mayer thing where there's a katana pedal or something that he would turn on or off, depending on some guitars. I'm not exactly sure. That might be a thing. I think Robin Ford is obviously quite a volume knob-based player anyway, so he's probably very used to sort of riding those differences. But again, let me know if there's exceptions to that, if you think there are examples of people that would have a sort of a different set of pedals that they use with one guitar than the other in a live situation where they're switching frequently, or do they have different settings on their amp? I think generally you'd keep the rig pretty similar, I think. Could be wrong. And again, I think that is somewhat like what my approach would be, you know, where you keep the virtual modeling rig pretty much the same. There is one exception to this that I've been finding really useful recently. So one of the things that I've not been a huge fan of with humbuckers is that they have far less snap than a single coil. You know, they're a little bit less scooped or whatever. So the mid-range is quite full. Obviously, my presets generally are created with single coils, so I would tend to be compensating for either a scooped or a relatively flat mid-range with a single coil. And then when I plug in humbuckers, some of the time you get two things going on. Either the Les Paul is sometimes going to be too hot for the preset in general, so that thing where I'm talking about where it's pushing things too far into the gain, so things might get like woolly, oversaturated, that sort of stuff. And then the other thing that might happen is that it's too mid-heavy, because I've already compensated for a lack of mids. When I push it again with more mids, is then overcompensating for the mids thing. One thing, really simple trick that I found can help with this is just to stick a simple EQ at the very start of the preset, cutting 600 Hertz by about 12 dB. It sounds extreme, but this is at the very front of the preset going into everything else, all the gain stages and amps and stuff. I found that has actually made it more enjoyable to play the Les Paul, and instead of never going to the neck pickup and thinking that was always sounding just a little bit bonkers, it's now a thing where I stayed on the neck pickup for the entire duration of the introduction, because this adjustment does seem to work for me. So that's one simple trick that you could maybe try, and one simple thing that makes me think that maybe I am missing out by not making some adjustments on a per preset basis for each guitar. I think it could potentially be quite a bit of admin to try and sort that out, but it's something to think about, I think, kind of a bit of food for thought. So try that if you've got, you know, some guitars that you normally play presets with, and you switch them out and you think, right, well that sounds crap or that doesn't. One of the key tweaks that I would suggest making now is just an EQ at the very front, 600 Hertz-ish for the Les Paul versus a single coil. Seems to be like that sweet, not a sweet spot even, but just the spot where there's a lot of mid activity. You could try moving that around. Probably between 400 and 800 or something like that might be kind of a good range of where you get some real differences. I was also boosting, I think, the 2K by about 5 dB, so doing a little bit of shaping there, and it did really, I think, make it more enjoyable to play the Les Paul through that preset. So it might be definitely something worth thinking about, particularly if you've got sort of your one kind of go-to preset. If you've got hundreds, then maybe this wouldn't be the approach, but if you've got one kind of key thing, or you've never really got it quite to the stage where you could make it work, then I think, particularly if you had a Les Paul and a Strat that you were trying to balance, if you had a block that you could turn on or off at the very start, especially if you're cutting the mids by minus 12 dB as well, I think that would be less likely to drive the input of the amp. So you might get cleaner cleans and a bit less gain overall as well. So maybe worth thinking about. Let me know your thoughts and tips in the comments. And the preset was Eric Lead 35, but with that EQ in the front. Let me know what you think. Gumroad is the place to get my presets if you want them. They sound like that. See you in another video soon. Cheers. She still hasn't dropped, so no strats.